I knew something was off the moment he called me Marge. Not Margaret, not Miss Harper. Just Marge, like I was some washed-up lunch lady who served expired Salisbury steak with a side of sarcasm. He said it with that smug, performative smirk that consultants wear like cologne, cheap, cloying, and designed to distract from incompetence. Marge, can I count on you to streamline compliance for our upcoming acquisition pitch? He asked, already spinning on his polished heel before I could answer. I stared at the back of his head, imagining all the things I wanted to hurl at it, starting with my three-ring binder and ending with Clause 17A.3. But of course, I didn't, because I was the grown-up in the room. I always had been. People didn't understand what I did, and that was the point. My job wasn't to be flashy. It was to make sure nobody got sued, fined, or dragged in front of federal regulators. 6 years of spotless records, airtight audits, and zero escalations. I built the internal compliance structure from duct tape and desperation and turned it into a machine. Not that anyone said thank you. They didn't even bother pretending. As long as the system didn't beep or blow up, I was wallpaper. Honestly, I didn't care. I liked being invisible. It meant no one interrupted me when I was writing policy at 2 a.m. or building risk matrices with the kind of joy other people reserved for baby photos. I wore cardigans, kept granola bars in my desk drawer, and had exactly 3 friends at work, none of whom had ever seen me cry. I was quiet power, and I liked it that way. But if you're one of those folks who listens to stories like this while half answering emails, let me just say, don't scroll away just yet. Take 2 seconds and tap subscribe and like. It keeps this story machine running and, frankly, keeps our team from switching to selling essential oils full time. We're hanging on by a binder clip and a dream here. Anyway, everything started tilting when he arrived. Cameron Price, Director of Transformation and Growth, whatever that meant. Fresh from some firm that charges 6 figures to tell companies to use prettier fonts and schedule more meetings. He walked into the Monday morning strategy session like a golden retriever on Red Bull, grinning too hard, talking too fast, and flinging around words like synergy and compliance light. I watched him fumble through a PowerPoint titled The Future of Us, complete with animated arrows and a stock photo of 3 racially diverse people high-fiving over a whiteboard. And then he turned to me. Marge, he said, you'll be our firewall fairy, right? He actually winked. I took a slow sip of my coffee and didn't respond. My silence must have unnerved him because he added, we'll need you to fast-track the compliance checklist so we can get buy-in from the buyer's side by EOD Wednesday. It's mostly box checking, right? Mostly box checking. I kept my face neutral, but inside something snapped like a brittle paperclip. That checklist was the only thing standing between us and a 7-figure lawsuit if someone skipped a mandatory protocol. But sure, box checking. I didn't argue, not yet. I just nodded and wrote down every word he said in a legal pad I would later label Cameron's greatest hits. I kept a backup in my desk, another in my bag, and one at home. Call it paranoia or wisdom. Either way, I was about to need it. The thing with people like Cameron is they think being loud is the same as being right. They perform leadership the way community theater actors perform Hamlet, overacted, under-researched, and allergic to feedback. Within a week, he had rescheduled 3 compliance reviews, consolidated 2 risk workflows into a single useless slide, and asked IT if they could auto-generate audit trails using ChatGPT. He called my documentation style dense and asked if I could convert protocols into infographic form. I told him compliance wasn't a coloring book. He didn't laugh, but the part that made my eye twitch, he wanted to present our internal data integrity system, the one I spent 3 years designing, as a selling point to a buyer demo scheduled 2 weeks earlier than planned. A $20M acquisition depended on that demo. Cameron thought skipping the final QA run was an acceptable risk. I told him it wasn't. He leaned in across the conference table, tilted his head like a Golden Corral manager about to deny a coupon, and said, Margaret, I need team players, not traffic cops. I stared at him, long and flat. I'm the one who makes sure your team doesn't drive off a compliance cliff. He smirked, watch your tone. And just like that, I realized something bone deep. Cameron had no clue what I actually did. Worse, he didn't care. 3 days after the firewall fairy comment, I found myself trapped in a windowless conference room that smelled like leftover egg salad and ego. The meeting invite had said acquisition readiness checkpoint, but what it really was a public ceremony where Cameron got to unzip his buzzwords and flop them onto the table like they were gospel. He was pacing in front of the whiteboard with a neon marker in one hand and his confidence in the other, rambling about velocity pivots and streamlined onboarding. No agenda, no documentation, just vibes. I waited until he paused for breath between acronyms and said, as calmly as I could, demo version of the data validation engine hasn't cleared internal QA. We're also still missing the dual auth sign-off in the access matrix. Cameron blinked. Okay, and I didn't flinch, and the change of control clause hasn't been signed. So technically, we can't transfer platform ownership to the buyer without legal exposure. Silence. Someone coughed into their sleeve. I could feel 20 eyeballs doing the boardroom shuffle, looking anywhere but at the two of us. Cameron gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Margaret, I get that compliance is your thing. It's not a thing, it's the law. He cut me off with a hand wave. We can't let process get in the way of progress. You're being, he trailed off, then snapped his fingers like he just solved a Sudoku. You're being negative. Let's not kill the momentum. Negative, like pointing out landmines on a battlefield made me the problem. I said nothing after that, just sat still, pen in hand, watching him sink deeper into his own ignorance. By the end of the meeting, he had reassigned my responsibilities to a marketing analyst named Justin who once asked if encryption meant turning files into PDFs. My inbox pinged 5 minutes later. Subject line immediate next steps, body full of bullet points that read like a death wish. By noon, HR had scheduled a behavioral review meeting. When I walked in, I was met by one of the newer reps, young, nervous, and visibly sweating under a blazer she clearly borrowed from her mom. She avoided eye contact while reading the complaint. It says here you were aggressive in tone and created a hostile environment during today's meeting. I stared at her. Did you read the transcript? She cleared her throat. There wasn't one, of course not. Cameron didn't want receipts, just headlines. I didn't argue. Arguing in HR is like bringing a smoke alarm to a house that's already ash. What hit me hardest wasn't the accusation. It was the realization that he truly didn't know what I did. Not in a figurative way. Literally. This man, who now held decision-making authority, had no idea what systems governed our data, who maintained the protocols, or what the legal implications were for what he was pushing forward. That was the moment the fear left me, and the math began. I walked back to my office, bypassed the meeting requests piling in my inbox, and opened the locked drawer where I kept the originals. The originals of everything: access logs, vendor agreements, backup access credentials. One binder, thick and unsmiling, labeled with my name and 3 red tabs. It wasn't a trophy. It was a time bomb with a smiley face sticker on the spine. Inside were every signed clause that required me to authorize transfer of system rights. Without that signature, we were a car with no title, pretty, polished, but legally undrivable. I hadn't built it that way by accident. 6 years ago, I watched our old CTO get scapegoated during a failed migration. No one had his back, and no one remembered what he'd done to keep us afloat. I learned then, if you want to be invisible, be indispensable. But if they force you out, make sure the door they shove you through is holding up the roof. I began emailing myself backups, slowly, carefully. Every hour a file here, a document there, nothing traceable, nothing loud, just insurance. Cameron had underestimated me. He'd confused quiet for weak, obedient for blind, and Margaret for replaceable. They called me in on a Thursday. Not even the dignity of a Friday afternoon mercy kill. Just a limp little Outlook invite titled Follow-Up Chat, dropped onto my calendar between 2 meetings about data retention policies they'll now royally screw up without me. When I entered the room, Cameron was already there. No smile, no laptop. Just that same condescending lean-back posture like he was about to offer me a coupon for a colonoscopy. Across from him sat Dana from HR, the one who once cried during an all-hands because someone made fun of her team-building slide deck. She avoided eye contact, hands clenched around a legal pad like it might shield her from what was coming. Margaret, Cameron began, thank you for coming. We want to start by saying we appreciate all your past contributions. Just say it, I said, sitting down without being asked. He exchanged a glance with Dana like I'd farted in church. We've received multiple reports, he said, that your communication style has created a hostile work environment. After reviewing these concerns, we've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately. Just like that. No mention of specific incidents, no examples, no legal counsel in the room, not even a courtesy performance review to pad the fall. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was sloppy. And sloppy, from a man obsessed with optics, told me one thing: this wasn't about performance. This was about control. I embarrassed him in front of a buyer. I told the truth. And in his world, truth was an act of aggression. Will there be an exit interview? I asked. Dana shifted in her seat. We know, not in this case, of course not. Cameron stood and held out a plain white envelope. Your severance package is included here. We've also deactivated your system's access, and security will escort me. I finished, naturally. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flip the table or knock over his overpriced ergonomic chair like he probably expected. No, I just stood, smoothed my cardigan, and took the envelope. He looked relieved. That was his mistake, because I wasn't planning a scene. I was planting a bomb. Back in my office, my real office, the one I'd held for 6 years while men like him rotated through buzzword-laced titles like fashion trends, I pulled open the second drawer. Inside was the thick navy blue binder. No stickers, no flair, just a white label with black block letters, M. Harper Legal Triggers and Control Docs. I placed it squarely in the center of my desk, facing the door. I flipped open the first tab just enough for the label to peek out. Change of control clauses, original authorizations required. Then I took a breath and walked out. No dramatic pause, no farewell speech, just a firm click as the door shut behind me. The security guy met me at the elevators. "You okay?" he asked, awkward and too kind. "I will be," I said. I handed him my badge, but not my silence. Outside, the air smelled like it always did downtown, like diesel fumes, burnt coffee, and wet cement. But that afternoon, it also smelled like freedom. Not the sunshine and daisies kind. The dangerous, sharp-edged kind you get when the leash snaps and the wolf remembers she still has teeth. I didn't go home. I went to the little cafe across the street, ordered a black coffee, and opened my phone. I had time now, time to put things in motion. I sent one message to a former colleague, an engineer who still owed me a favor for saving his ass during a vendor audit. I didn't say much, just check the binder on my desk. Pay attention to tab 3. Then I turned my phone off and sat there for an hour, watching my old building like it was a theater. Because it was. And the curtain was just starting to rise. Cameron thought he'd written the final chapter. Poor man, he didn't even know which book he was in. The first crack showed up exactly 5 business days after they marched me out with all the subtlety of a prison transfer. A QA analyst, one of the quiet ones who used to hover outside my door with bug reports and a nervous smile, flagged a missing checksum in the data export logs. It was a tiny thing. One misplaced digit, a single inconsistent hash string in a batch of validation files that were supposed to be airtight before demo day. I used to call those canary errors. Not fatal by themselves, but loud enough to warn you the mine was filling with gas. But without me there to translate the alarm, the canary just choked and died on someone's JIRA ticket. Cameron's replacement for me was a contract hire named Trina, fresh off a year doing governance ops at a tech startup that sold artisanal dog treats. She introduced herself in Slack as a compliance ninja. Her first act was deleting half my dashboards because they had too many fields. When QA pinged her about the checksum, she responded with a smiling emoji and the phrase, "Let's not overthink." They were already over the cliff, they just hadn't looked down yet. By week 2, 3 more issues popped up. One involved mismatched timestamps on the encryption keys I had personally reviewed and embedded with fallback protocols. Another was a data migration report that got auto-flagged in the sandbox environment because it failed two-factor validation. Trina dismissed both. When a junior engineer raised a hand during stand-up and said, "Didn't Margaret usually review these before handoff?" Cameron laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, theatrical laugh that made the poor guy look like he'd just confessed to still using AOL. "Margaret's obsession with redundancy was the reason we move so slowly," he said. "This is the new era. We're agile now." Agile. As if ignoring legal trigger clauses was just an optional yoga pose. He kept using that word in every team update, every memo, agile. What he meant was sloppy but fast. Code got pushed without peer review. Vendor contracts were reissued using templates pulled from Google Docs. At least one of them still had another company's name watermarked in the footer. I know because someone forwarded it to me anonymously with the subject line, "Hope you're enjoying your coffee." I was. The kicker? The acquisition demo was still locked for the same day I'd originally postponed 6 months earlier due to incomplete legal pathways. System they planned to demo included API endpoints that weren't covered by our transfer of ownership agreement. Those APIs were the backbone of our cloud services. Transferring them without my sign-off meant, legally, the buyer couldn't take control without assuming liability for all historical data. That clause had my name on it, my literal name. Cameron didn't know that. Trina didn't even know what control logs were. Legal should have caught it, but they didn't. Why? Because the new guy overseeing legal workflows was Cameron's college buddy, recently promoted from biz dev. His only credential was a LinkedIn certificate in regulatory agility. They were all dancing on a fault line, high on self-congratulation. I saw the internal emails. A friend forwarded one chain where Cameron praised the streamlined pivot and boasted to the C-suite that the team had liberated the platform from process bloat. Meanwhile, QA was sending out red flag tickets that got marked as low priority. I saw another forwarded message, an engineer begging for a pre-demo walkthrough of the system because too many workflows are still linked to inactive access tiers. Trina's reply, "We'll fix it in post." That smiley face should be framed and hung in a museum for catastrophic mismanagement. And still, no one had looked in the binder. Still, no one realized that the most critical clause, the one about change of control, required not just any compliance officer's signature, but mine, Margaret Harper, and no one else. I hadn't designed it out of spite. I designed it because I knew someday someone like Cameron would come along. Someone who thought the law was a speed bump, not a cliff. Someone who would mistake red flags for decorative throw pillows. The system was groaning. The teams were squinting at shadows. The pressure was building. And all Cameron could do was grin in town halls and say, "We're almost there." A week before demo day, my phone buzzed during lunch. Just one line from Ben in DevSecOps. He thinks boilerplate means optional. I didn't even have to ask who he was. I was halfway through a ham sandwich at the window seat of the cafe across the street, the same one where I'd watched my own termination like a reverse wake and nearly choked on rye. I sipped my coffee, wiped my fingers on a napkin, and typed back, "Which clause?" Ben replied with a screenshot from Slack. Cameron had tagged legal and IT in a thread titled Buyer Access. Let's lock it in. His message, copy-pasted for all to see, read, looping y'all into finalize buyer login staging. Compliance stuff is boilerplate, right? Just toss in whatever doc Trina has on file. We're good to go, right? Words boilerplate and good to go lit up on my screen like neon. Let me explain something about boilerplate and compliance. Yes, some language gets recycled, risk statements, indemnity clauses, the usual fluff to keep lawyers warm at night. But change of control clauses, those are handcrafted, legally binding, tailored like bespoke suits, and the one in question, I had written it myself. Clause 17A.3, not just reviewed, written, required the original system architect, me, to sign off on platform asset transfer before legal ownership could be executed. It wasn't filler. It was a reinforced steel vault door with my name etched into the hinges, and Cameron was treating it like a post-it note. Across the street, the glass windows of the 14th floor gleamed in the sunlight. Behind one of those panes, Cameron was probably grinning into a ring light for some internal hype video, saying things like we're crushing it, and this is the final lap, to people too tired or too polite to contradict him. I tucked my phone away and finished my sandwich. Ben kept feeding me breadcrumbs. He'd never been one for office drama, but he respected process, and he knew enough to recognize a slow-motion train wreck when he saw it. Trina just asked how to retrosign a PDF, one message read. Legal asked if she had the compliance binder, and she said, oh, I think Cameron recycled it. Another, new buyer doc still says M. Harper as point of contact. Each message felt like a fuse burning closer to the powder keg. Meanwhile, back inside the building, the team was dressing the pig for its big debut. Presentation decks were getting last-minute animations. Color-coded spreadsheets were flying like confetti. Someone had installed a giant countdown timer in the break room labeled T-Demo Day. It looked like a cross between a startup and a cult. Nobody was asking questions. Not because they trusted Cameron, but because the energy was so manic and fragile, no one wanted to be the pin that popped the balloon. People clung to phrases like we're close and let's just get through Friday. They weren't even pretending it was stable, they were just hoping it didn't collapse until someone else was holding the bag. Trina was barely treading water. I heard she'd stopped replying to internal DMs and started forwarding everything to legal with vague comments like per Cameron's verbal guidance, a classic move for someone trying to build her own raft before the ship went under. And yet, despite all this, the momentum didn't slow. Cameron had promised the board this would be done before the quarter ended. The buyer's team had flown in. Conference rooms were booked. Hotel accommodations arranged. Even ordered catering, elevated lunchboxes, apparently, because nothing says due diligence like a $24 avocado wrap. From my perch across the street, I watched it all unfold like theater. The glass reflected movement, shadows pacing, heads nodding, bodies leaning forward with forced optimism. I wondered if anyone had even noticed the binder. I doubted it. They were too busy polishing slides to notice the foundation groaning beneath them, too fixated on fonts and file names to ask the only question that mattered. Was the change of control clause executed? That question was coming. I could feel it like the rumble before a quake. And when it did, it wouldn't be me holding the silence. The conference room was staged like a crime scene with too many witnesses and not enough exits. Rows of bottled water lined the credenza. A whiteboard displayed the word partnership in 3 colors. The flat screen showed the company logo pulsing softly in a slideshow loop, as if trying to hypnotize everyone into believing this would go smoothly. It did not. The buyer's team arrived right on time, 4 sharp-suited professionals from a West Coast firm known for chewing up acquisitions and spitting out the bones with a glossy smile. Their lead auditor, a woman named Patel with a jawline that could cut glass and a voice that never changed tempo, introduced herself with a handshake that made Cameron visibly wince. He tried his usual shtick. We're super excited about the alignment here, he beamed. This is gonna be a major win-win. Patel didn't blink. Let's begin with the system validation walkthrough. IT kicked off the demo with a fake it till you make it energy, clicking through dashboards and input fields with rehearsed flair. For exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, it almost worked. Then came the live data validation. The demo froze, cursor spinning, backend calls stalling. An entire segment of the API failed to load the data layer, not just lagged dead. Someone from our side started furiously typing into a terminal. Trina was sweating through her blouse. Cameron leaned forward, frowning in performative concern. Must be server latency, he announced confidently. We've been optimizing the environment, but the room had changed. Buyers stopped nodding. Laptops opened. Patel tapped once on her keyboard and a PDF opened on her screen. I'd like to see the compliance documentation, she said. Specifically the protocol history for this data engine and the legal basis for transfer of platform ownership. Everyone turned to legal. And legal, God help them, turned to Trina. Trina opened the conference room cabinet, pulled out the thick binder someone had fished out of a file box after Ben quietly reminded them that the digital backups had login issues, and placed it in my binder onto the table like it was just another stapled PDF. The irony made me laugh out loud in the cafe across the street. No one heard it, but I did. Patel opened the binder. Flip, flip, pause, her brow arched. Clause 17A.3, she said flatly. Effective change of control requires named officer consent. She turned the binder slightly for the rest of her team to see. Her finger tapped the signature line. It was blank. And under the signature line, printed in black Arial, was Margaret Harper, Director of Compliance, Original System Architect. Patel looked up. Where is Miss Harper? She asked. Cameron blinked. She's no longer with the company. Patel nodded once. Then who authorized this transfer? Cameron opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Legal like they might toss him a life preserver. Legal stared back hollow-eyed. Patel wasn't done. This clause states that without the explicit consent of the named officer, no data system covered under Appendix B may be transferred, accessed, or demoed in any capacity that constitutes commercial intent. That includes what just occurred. The room went still. Even the flat screen paused, mid-fade between slogans. Cameron tried to rally. We assumed it was a standard clause. Boilerplate. Then you didn't read it, Patel said. No inflection, just judgment pure and undiluted. Trina stepped back, 1 inch, but noticeable. Patel closed the binder. I'm going to need to pause this session. Our counsel will review whether this demonstration constitutes a breach of mutual nondisclosure and whether the attempted transfer was conducted in bad faith. There were no protests, just the sound of Cameron swallowing hard. Outside the conference room, someone knocked over a chair. In the hallway, 2 engineers stood frozen, holding a laptop between them like it was radioactive. The building hadn't collapsed, not yet, but the supports had started to scream. Patel returned to the conference room like a surgeon scrubbed in for the kill. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't angry. She was surgical. Her assistant trailed behind her, wheeling in a slim aluminum case that clicked ominously when he opened it and removed a printed copy of the transfer file, hard copy, watermarked, time-stamped. She dropped it beside the binder. Let's go line by line, she said. Cameron tried to sit taller, like posture could mask panic. Look, we've been moving quickly to meet your timeline. Some of the documentation is still being finalized, but the intent here is clear. Patel raised one hand, not to silence him, but to slice him mid-sentence. Intent, she said, doesn't override execution. Then she flipped the binder back to Clause 17A.3, as if the previous hour had just been the trailer, and now the feature presentation was beginning. She pointed to the blocky text I had written in plain English. No jargon, no ambiguity. Transfer of platform access, source code. Backend control is contingent on explicit written consent from the named officer listed below. And below it, a signature line. Beneath that, Margaret Harper, Director of Compliance, System Originator. The line was blank. Patel looked to Legal. Did anyone secure the sign-off? Legal hesitated. The lead counsel, a man with 6 unread Slack messages visible on his phone screen and panic in his pupils, finally cleared his throat. We're under the impression that the requirement was ceremonial. Patel didn't even grace that with a response. She turned to her own legal team, a trio of tailored suits and controlled expressions. One of them, a man in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard and the weary look of someone who'd buried 100 bad deals, leaned forward and tapped the page. This isn't your signature, he said flatly. He looked at Cameron. So, tell me, without Miss Harper's authorization, on what legal basis were you attempting to transfer ownership of a system with embedded data assets protected under regulatory compliance? Cameron stammered, It's just a formality. She was let go and we assumed, the man echoed. That word has no legal standing. He picked up the paper like it smelled of bleach and bad decisions. Clause 17A.3 is clear. No signature, no transfer. Which means, as of this moment, you've demonstrated a product you do not have legal rights to present, access, or offer for sale. Cameron flushed so fast his neck turned crimson. It was never our intent, the man cut him off. Intent doesn't matter. Execution does. There it was again, execution. A word that in this room felt less like process and more like punishment. Patel closed the binder with a dull thud. We'll be discussing this with our internal counsel. We're pausing all movement on this deal. Effective immediately, she stood. Her team stood with her, chairs scraped like gravestones. Cameron opened his mouth, but no words came. The room didn't just go quiet, it ossified. Time stopped. You could hear the hum of the projector, the faint clink of someone's wedding ring tapping their pen in nervous rhythm. Patel glanced at the binder one more time. You'd know that, she said quietly, if you'd read it. And then she walked out. Nobody followed, not immediately. Cameron sat there with his mouth slightly open, blinking like he'd just found out gravity was optional and someone had revoked his right to stand. Across the street, I finished my coffee and opened the next email from Ben. Subject line, he's Googling, can you backdate a signature? I smiled. No, Cameron, no, you can't. By the next morning, the demo room was stripped bare. The timer in the break room went dark. Someone unplugged it at 6:43 a.m., probably after realizing no one wanted to count down to their own autopsy. The deal was off. Officially, the buyer postponed the acquisition indefinitely for internal review, which in corporate dialect means we saw the iceberg, thanks, we'll pass on the cruise. Unofficially, Patel's team had already pulled out of the hotel and rerouted their return flights. The fancy lunch boxes, avocado wraps, chia shots, and microgreens in mason jars sat untouched, curling under the fluorescent lights like funeral offerings. By noon, the emails started. First came the investor noise, short, clipped demands for status updates, followed by longer, more blistering threads from people who had already texted their lawyers. The board was furious. Apparently, they'd been kept in the dark about the clause, and the failed demo, and my departure. One message that leaked, because of course it did. Read, why did no one inform us that the system was not legally transferable post-Harper? Because, dear board members, nobody asked. Legal was hauled into a call so tense it scorched the VPN. They claimed they had never reviewed my termination, that HR handled it unilaterally based on Cameron's verbal directive. HR claimed they'd been pressured and unclear on process. Meanwhile, the actual HR lead, the same Dana who handed me the envelope with trembling hands, went silent for hours. Rumor has it she called out sick. No one blamed her. Then IT got involved. They were asked to verify whether I had truly withheld access to anything after I left. What they found instead, my badge logs, my final logout timestamp, my spotless trail, no files deleted, no documents hidden, nothing malicious, but something else caught their eye. The internal camera footage. Apparently someone in security, board or bidder or both, leaked a 37-second clip to the internal Slack. It showed Cameron, alone in the hallway pacing just outside HR. Dana's voice is off-screen. Do you want her to sign something for legal? Cameron scoffs. No, she'll pack her desk and leave. She doesn't even matter. He says it with a laugh. That line hit harder than he ever expected. Because within 2 hours, it was trending on the company's private Discord. Screenshotted, circulated, annotated with emojis. A timestamp monument to hubris. And suddenly, I mattered a great deal. By 4:00 p.m., the CEO's office had gone dark, blinds drawn, executive assistant missing in action. Word spread that the board was holding emergency sessions to assess liability risk. At 5:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel in accounting, one of the few people who always left granola bars on my desk when I skipped lunch. They're scrambling. CEO wants to speak with you, personally. I stared at the message for a long moment, and then I did the only logical thing. I powered off my phone. I leaned back in the cafe booth, sunlight crawling up the window, and watched the building across the street. The one I used to run from the inside out. They never understood what I built. Not really. I just assumed the machinery ran because it should. That protocols maintained themselves, that platforms stabilized through sheer intention. But I wasn't a cog, I was the architect, and now the walls were buckling without me. Let them buckle. I sipped my coffee, breathed in the slow collapse, and smiled. They gave Cameron one last chance to lie convincingly. It was 9:03 a.m. on Monday when Patel's team returned, not for negotiation, not for reconciliation, but to ensure every page of legal exposure was reviewed before formally walking away. This time, they brought a forensic compliance specialist and their own outside counsel. The boardroom was full, dead silent except for the sound of paper sliding and knuckles tightening. Patel didn't bother with a preamble. She held up the binder. Clause 17A.3 was already dog-eared. She looked at the assembled executive team, what was left of them, and asked, voice calm and precise, who approved Margaret Harper's termination without reassigning her compliance authority? Legal didn't shuffle papers. They didn't delay. They answered the way a body answers when the heart's already stopped. No one, the word hung there untouched. No process, no documentation, no formal handoff, not even a memo. Just an off-the-books power play by a man who thought compliance was optional and signatures were ceremonial. Patel nodded once. Understood, she turned to her counsel. Terminate proceedings, prepare the disengagement documentation. There is no enforceable platform transfer here. The buyer walked. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just suits standing, chairs pushed in, and a $20 million handshake dissolving in real time. They were gone before Cameron could muster a sentence. 10 minutes later, Cameron was called upstairs. By noon, his badge was deactivated. An intern caught a blurry photo of him being escorted through the lobby, still trying to explain something to the security guard. The caption someone posted in Slack read, server latency, bro. By 2:00 p.m., the board sent out a company-wide memo full of empty phrases. Transition, realignment, renewed strategic focus. No mention of me, no mention of the clause, just a soft erasure of everything they'd misunderstood. But people knew. They'd seen the binder. They'd watched the tape. They'd heard the silence. And across the street, in a quiet office with clean lines and an espresso machine that didn't scream like a dying badger, I closed my laptop. My new desk faced west. The skyline was clearer here. Less noise. No post-it walls or countdown clocks. Just results. The company name on the door was smaller, quieter, but the work was clean, and the leadership knew exactly who they'd hired. The screen glowed with my title, VP of Risk and Strategic Systems. Beneath it, a new clause I'd just drafted blinked on the screen, cursor steady. All system transfers must be authorized in writing by the named officer. No exceptions, no assumptions, no boilerplate. I saved the file, locked it, stood, no applause, no champagne, just a long breath, and cold, perfect triumph. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.